Regulated MS4s in the state of Kentucky are required to adopt, implement, and enforce 3 regulatory mechanisms. This is done in a variety of ways. For most of our municipal permittees, it'll be done through adoption of ordinances, but you'll also sometimes see some of these requirements show up in, for example, a stormwater manual or another document that itself is adopted by ordinance. We also have some non-traditional MS4s, such as universities, that don't have the power to enact ordinances. So they address these through policies. As far as construction and post-construction go, they own the property, so they regulate this through contract language and such like. As the title of the presentation said, these are minimum requirements. Permittees are fully authorized and encouraged, and oftentimes do have requirements that are more stringent than what their MS4 permit requires. But again, these are minimal requirements. I just want to make sure that's clear. So the 3 regulatory mechanisms that have to be adopted, implemented, and enforced are a prohibition of illicit discharges to the MS4, construction site stormwater runoff control ordinance, and then a post-construction stormwater management and new and redevelopment. So the first ordinance is the illicit discharge ordinance, and this is the backbone of your MS4 program. What this ordinance needs to say and enforce is that no one shall cause anything other than stormwater to go into the storm sewer system. As it says, prohibits and provides enforcement remedies for illicit discharges into the storm sewer system. The Clean Water Act defines an illicit discharge as any discharge to the storm sewer system that's not composed entirely of stormwater. So you see where you could go with that. That could cover anything, honestly, from sediment leaving a construction site, dirty runoff leaving a site after construction's finished, people dumping chemicals, anything like that that is not pure stormwater going into the storm sewer system should be covered by your illicit discharge ordinance and give you a way to mitigate any of those discharges. As you see there further in the definition, there are some exceptions. Discharges pursuant to another NPDES permit, so not your MS4 permit, but for example, a industrial stormwater permit or construction permit, those discharges are authorized. It also specifically calls out discharges resulting from firefighting activities. And our permits also identify about 17 more authorized non-stormwater discharges. Those are always in section 1 of the permits. So the next ordinance is your construction site stormwater runoff control ordinance. This is the one that folks are usually most familiar with when it comes to MS4. You'll hear this called erosion prevention and sediment control ordinance often, or the EPSC ordinance. And this is all about minimizing pollutants and stormwater runoff to the MS4 from applicable construction sites. As anybody knows, when you disturb the ground cover on a site, the potential for erosion increases dramatically. So while in theory, the illicit discharge ordinance would cover construction sites, this ordinance and the post-construction ordinance give specific requirements for those kind of instances. So your ordinance needs to apply to all KYR 10 eligible sites. The KYR 10 is the state construction stormwater general permit. That's for any land disturbances of an acre or more, or a land disturbance of less than an acre if it's a larger common plan of development. Larger common plan, there's lots of questions about that. I won't go too far into it. If you want more information in the KYR 10 fact sheet, there's an FAQ section where there's 3 or 4 pages that's devoted to larger common plan of development. But in general, we're talking about things like subdivisions, shopping centers, things like that, where each individual project probably isn't going to disturb an acre, but overall, there will be more of an acre of disturbance. So any site like that in the state has to get KYR 10 coverage from the state, but in a regulated MS4 community, they also need to get a permit from the local municipality. And the idea behind this is it just enhances oversight of these sites greater than what the Division of Water can provide. As far as the minimum requirements in the permits, you have to require that site operators implement their EPSC BMPs at least to a point that they're as protective as those required by the KYR 10. So if the state requires it, you need to require it in your construction ordinance. That is for erosion prevention and sediment control. You also have a lot of other site waste that can wind up in runoff from the site, your ordinance needs to provide for control of those as well. Talking about things like discarded building materials, concrete washouts is always a big one. Sanitary waste from porta potties and the like, and then litter. I think everybody here has been on a construction site. Construction crews generate a lot of litter. So all that needs to be addressed by your construction ordinance and have remedies for that. Along with those requirements for BMPs, you also have to have requirements to make sure that the site operators have applied for the state permit. So before any land disturbance can begin, before the local permit is issued, regulated MS4s have to ensure that the site operator has submitted a notice of intent for our KYR10 construction stormwater permit. You also have to establish authority for site plan review and approval of BMP plans. It's not enough for them to just apply for this permit. You have to have somebody on staff that reviews the permit, make sure everything looks good from erosion prevention, sediment control, and just as far as meeting all ordinance requirements. And then that plan has to be approved before land disturbance begins. You need to establish authority so that you can go in and inspect these sites. And then finally, establish authority for enforcement of control measures. So for issues of non-compliance, how do you handle that? It needs to be included in the ordinance, and really all three of these ordinances. The last ordinance is the post-construction stormwater management in new and redevelopment sites. So where the construction ordinance and your construction program as a regulated MS4 are focused on active construction sites, the post-construction ordinance is all about once construction's finished, how do we manage water quality from these sites in perpetuity? So once again, we're talking about any KYR10 eligible sites where there's a land disturbance of an acre or more, or a land disturbance of less than an acre, but it's part of a larger common plan of development. New development obviously is taking farmland, an empty lot, whatever it is, and constructing something on it. Redevelopment is when there's demolition involved, the exterior of the structure is being altered, and more importantly, the footprint of the structure is being altered. That's what we're talking about with redevelopment sites. And this is all about requiring permanent controls to manage stormwater quality over the life of the property's use. And so in this, we're talking about implementing and installing structural and non-structural BMPs. Structural post-construction BMPs would be the things that you think of: grass swales, detention basins, water quality devices, all those kind of things. But another important part of that is the non-structural BMPs, which are maintenance activities, vegetation management, those kind of things. So the requirements for your post-construction ordinance: number one, sites should attempt to maintain pre-development runoff conditions. We're talking peak flow and volume. NPDES permits and KPDS permits are focused on water quality in general. This is the only time you're going to see water quantity show up in an MS4 permit. But the language does say that sites need to maintain or attempt to maintain their pre-development runoff conditions. As we all know, volume and velocity can themselves be a major detriment to receiving waters. You're required to develop an on-site stormwater runoff quality treatment standard for your MS4 area. This is based at minimum on the depth of runoff generated from the 80th percentile precipitation event. So for that site, the amount of impervious area on that site, what's the volume of runoff that's going to come from an 80th percentile precipitation event? It's left up to permittees to calculate that 80th percentile. So we see a bit of a range. For the state of Kentucky in general, the average is about 3/4 of an inch is what needs to be managed and what needs to be required to be managed by this ordinance. Your ordinance needs to specify design parameters for BMP sizing. And that's just to say that that 80th percentile precipitation event, that volume of water, you need to make sure your BMPs can handle that. As it's stated in the permit, your typical annual runoff from the site is managed through water quality BMPs. And then for redevelopment projects, sometimes the standard is a little different in MS4 ordinances, but especially for redevelopment, that standard needs to reflect local issues, including water quality impairments. So if you are discharging to an impaired waterway, whatever the cause of that impairment, that pollutant needs to be addressed in your runoff quality treatment standard. So along with those requirements, the post-construction ordinance has a couple of options available if the water quality standard can't be met for a certain site. The first is offsite mitigation. It is what it sounds like, that you are allowed to put in your ordinance that if a site can't meet the post-construction BMP requirements, they can implement measures elsewhere in the same water sewer shed to enhance water quality. Regional basins, like we'll hear from the city of Radcliffe here in a little while, is a big way that people go this route. And then as the permittee, if you're going to allow offsite mitigation, you have to identify priority areas for mitigation projects. You can't just leave it up to the site owner or operator to decide where they want to do their offsite mitigation. You have to point them to a specific project. The other option that can be allowed in your post-construction ordinance is payment in lieu. And this is where the site can't meet the BMP requirements, so they pay a fee to the MS4 instead of installing those post-construction BMPs. Those funds have to be used for a public stormwater project. And in order to enact either option, you must, as the permittee, you need to create an inventory of appropriate mitigation projects. So again, some thought goes into this and say, okay, well, if you can't have BMPs on site, this is where we need them, and this is the type of projects we need. And then also there needs to be an administrative system to evaluate and track the financial transactions that are going on here. When you're thinking about the value of a post-construction BMP for the life of a property, that should be a substantial amount of money. So you just need to make sure that you have ways of making sure that that money is handled responsibly and used as it's supposed to. So that's it for the 3 required ordinances for our MS4 permittees.